Okay. Please be seated. Dear Professor Wakkary, dear colleagues and students, ladies and gentlemen, a very good afternoon and a warm welcome at our university and the inaugural lecture of Professor Wakkary. But before we listen to his lecture, I have the pleasure to say a few words of introduction. It's an interesting coincidence, although I'm not quite sure whether it's a coincidence that we have this lecture here today, precisely during the Dutch Design Week. As you're aware, Eindhoven is hosting the 18th Dutch Design Week this week, and in time it has become the biggest event in Northern Europe on design. About 2,500 designers present their work and ideas to close to 300,000 people that are visiting Eindhoven this week, both from our country and many, many international visitors. The Dutch Design Week is different from many of the other design events because it concentrates on the design of the future. What makes it even more unique is perhaps the Eindhoven ecosystem. We find ourselves in the heart of Brainport, which, with its high-tech manufacturing pedigree. It's a combination of this hotspot combining design and high-tech industry. It's fairly unique in the world, I would say. With only 2 more days to go of the Dutch Design Week, I cordially invite all of you and encourage you basically to come and visit the specific exhibit that we have. It's called Mind to Step. It's organized by the combined engineering universities of the Netherlands, and they brought together their ideas in the Klokgebouw at Strijpes. So I can only encourage you to visit that. It's really beautiful. You'll find a myriad of designs waiting for you to be discovered with a synergy of technology, research, and design. Products, systems, and services that relate to how we learn, move, live, stay healthy, and reproduce. Think of artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things. Also think of smarter machines and devices. All things can be seen at the Mind to Step exhibition. Wakkary received a Master of Fine Arts in 1993 from the State University of New York and a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Nova Scotia College of Arts and Design in Canada, and that was in '89. In 2000, he was appointed Associate Professor in Interactive Arts at the Technical University of British Columbia. Followed in 2002, he was appointed Associate Professor in the School of Interactive Arts and Technology at Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. And he received his PhD from the School of Computing, Communications and Electronics at the University of Plymouth in the UK, and that was in 2009. And later in 2012, he was promoted to full professor at his home university, the Simon Fraser University in Vancouver. There he investigates the changing nature of interaction design in response to everyday design and social practices. He's co-editor-in-chief of ACM Interactions, a member of several steering committees, such as the Tangible, Embedded and Embodied Interaction Steering Committee, and the Steering Committee for Designing Interactive Systems. And as of August 2014, he was appointed at our university in the Department of Industrial Design. In his lecture, he considers the concept of design broadly in order to harness it as a mode of human thought and embodied action on the part of everyone. Professor Wakkary will go into the question why we continue to design chairs even after we have been doing that for ages, I would say. And what the implications of this question are today for the design of technological artifacts. He argues that design is a way of knowing that is distinct from other disciplines. In design, the world is analyzed through the relationships between things and people. So I'm really curious what this looks like. So designing to know. Your lecture, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you. Hello. So I want to thank the Rector Magnificus, board of the university for putting their trust in me as a professor here at TUE, the deans, faculty of industrial design, Design United, my colleagues here at TUE and in the Netherlands and abroad for being here, and family and friends. I also want to start by acknowledging my colleagues and students in the Chair of Impact of Interaction Design on Everyday Life here at TUE and Everyday Design Studio at Simon Fraser University. It's really through their spirit of generosity, their intellect, their knowledge, and their creativity that has really formed me and has informed the research that I'm going to talk about today. So thank you very much. So the theme of my talk is designing to know. I elaborate on this theme in three interrelated ways. Designing to know by professional designers, by everyday designers, that's all of us, and by design researchers. For example, as a design researcher, I conduct research by designing things. Things that we can live with daily and experience over time. For example, the most recent projects from my research group involved the making of ceramic bowls and cups. In one project, we designed large ceramic bowls that are embedded with digital processing and small motors so that they periodically tilt. The tilting aims to invite people to intervene and speculate on the lived-with experience of digital technologies within everyday artifacts. In a previous project, we designed a hook, which is made of porcelain and maple wood, that when positioned at different angles, glows different colors. In this case, we aimed to design a digital artifact that was so open-ended, it could be used in a myriad of ways that we, as designers, could not anticipate. So later in this talk, I'll return to and I'll expand on the tilting bowl and the hook, as these projects are known. But for now, it's worth saying that these things investigate alternative forms of digital artifacts that are aimed at slowing down our understanding of digital technologies in order to make visible the relations that form between us and digital things over time. It's through these relations that we create our everyday experience. The focus of my research is to understand everyday relationships with and mediations of yet unknown digital things. So my research aims to reveal the nuanced, intimate, and even unconscious ways people understand and engage with everyday artifacts. These things and relations may seem trivial, but I hope to show their importance in how they dynamically shape our everyday life. I will do this by broadening our understanding of design and who designs to include every one of us as everyday designers, alongside professional designers, and raise the stakes of design to be more than functionality, more than symbolic meaning, but rather to be a way of knowing and shaping the world around us, even through simple things like a bowl. So from an anthropological viewpoint, a bowl would be seen as a technology. A bowl would intuitively be placed in the inventory of basic technologies as a tool related to food gathering, preparation, and consumption. Alongside a bowl in this inventory would be a chair, a tool for human shelter and comfort. Now here's a picture of the earliest example that we know of a chair, which is from the Neolithic era. And interestingly for me, my first real interest in design was chairs. So Marcel Breuer's Vasily chair is a real favorite of mine. In fact, I purchased one at the flea market in New York City. Here it is. The chair originally was made in 1925. It was made using fabric, and Breuer was the first furniture designer to use tubular steel. He was inspired by bicycle manufacturing. Now my wife, Resha, who's here, and our children will tell you it's an awful chair. For one, it occupies too much space. since it's quite wide. It's not that my family does not appreciate the design heritage. Trust me, I tell them about these things. It's just that it's an awful chair to sit in. Really, no one sits in it in our home. As the story goes, the chair was designed for the painter Vasily Kandinsky. Hence the chair is named Vasily. Kandinsky was tall and relatively heavy set with a fairly wide posterior. And so the chair is quite wide in the seating area, and the material is very tightly stretched across the frame. Now this may have been well designed for Kandinsky's weight and posterior girth, but for someone like me, I uncomfortably slide around in the chair trying to get comfortable. Now when I purchased the chair in the flea market, I thought, well, this is really rare, this is really quite a find. Of course, as it turns out, with early and mid-century furniture, the chair is quite ubiquitous and readily produced by many manufacturers. Now this is a chair, so of course it's not really a problem, since chairs are meant to be ubiquitous. As design artifacts, they are mundane and everyday. You can see this in the Witter Design Museum in Weil am Rhein in Germany, or the MAC, or Museum of Applied Arts in Vienna. Both have fantastic collections of chairs. What is plainly evident is that the chairs are not only ubiquitous, but are also incredibly diverse in form, materials, and style. So since the Neolithic period at least, we've designed a lot of chairs. Which leads to the nagging question, why? Why have we designed so many different chairs? And why do we continue to design chairs? Are we aiming to master the art of sitting? Do we need a chair for every context? Well, my quick answer is that we continuously design different chairs to know the things around us, an everyday world and ourselves. The designing and making of a new thing is a particular way of asking, if this thing exists today, how our everyday world would be altered. We design chairs to know. Now, others may have less philosophical answers, like functionality, symbolic meaning. Well, my view is that some functionality is necessary, but it's not a sufficient way to understand the objects and the things we make. I've already pointed out that we have a Vasily chair and no one sits in it. Symbolic meaning is important, but it is focused on what a particular thing represents, its look and its style, overlooking the experience of the existence of the thing, its concrete and material connections to us. So for example, this is the Aeron chair. It's designed by Don Chadwick and Don Stumpf, and it's regarded in industrial design as a model of ergonomics, innovative materials, and advances in manufacturing. Despite this, it's best known as the dot-com throne. That it's so tied to the era of the 1990s and the tech startups and what became the internet bust. Now the problem here is that the symbolic meaning of a chair does not actually account for the chair itself. Rather, it makes a cultural reference to something else. In viewing objects for symbolic meaning, the objects themselves disappear. They stand for something else rather than what they stand for themselves. Now, my argument about functionality and symbolic meaning is heavily borrowed from, where are you now? Peter Paul Verbeek, who we heard from this afternoon, a philosopher of technology. Now, Peter Paul argues for a post-phenomenological account of design rooted in technological mediation. In a post-phenomenological understanding, things and us are interdependent. So that means that they mutually shape each other. And as a whole, technology or design things mediate the relations between our world and us. In this sense, the product of design, and this is to quote Peter Paul, is not a thing, but a human world relations in which practices and experiences take shape. So for all my talk about chairs, designers are not designing chairs after all, but the practices and experiences that emerge. So Peter Paul gives the example of when a dinner table is used. It functions to support the arrangement of dinnerware, food, and people. But this function in the table itself is not consciously experienced. Rather, it's absorbed and incorporated into the practice of having dinner and eating. It is from within this absorption into practice that the table mediates the various relations of having a dinner. The mediation of the table relies on the practical utility of the table, of course, otherwise everything would be on the floor. But it's not about the functionality, but the phenomenon that arises from it functioning as a table. The table, and each table that is designed, is an inquiry into what is a dinner? What's a social relation? What's a social arrangement of people? What are the relations of things and people together? Now, mediation is concerned with the material existence of things and not symbolic meaning. So a speed bump, an example originally given by the anthropologist, philosopher Bruno Latour, reveals the difference between mediation with signs in comparison to material things. Again, Peter Paul Verbeek makes it clear that the concrete material presence of the bump physically compels people to slow down. And so things do not function in language, but in material forms. In functioning as material objects, they do more than just function. They shape and are shaped by human actions and experiences, potentially creating new relations between the world and us. So for example, this garment, called Vibing, was by two recent TUe Industrial Design doctoral graduates, Martijn ten Bomer and Christy Kusk, and designer Un Young Yon. Explores the continuum between technology relations as articulated by another philosopher of technology, Don Ida. Vibing is a merino wool garment that can also perform vibration therapy. The garment enables movement, feeling, and healing through vibration. Here in mediation terms, vibing can be seen as an alterity relation, that is, as a technology to be interacted with. However, it also manifests an embodied relation by amplifying our sense of touch and movement. The shaping of what we know through mediation means that, and I promise this is the last time I'll quote you, Peter Paul, I think, useful objects take center stage. So the potential power of things, and by extension, those involved in their shaping or becoming part of the existence of things, cannot be underestimated. Don Ida makes this clear in what he refers to as the standard of the artifact. By this, he means the power of artifacts to transform the way we see and know the world. An excellent example of this is a clock called Weekend Alarm, designed by Anna Spa, a recent graduate of TUe Industrial Design. The form and intended presence of the Weekend Alarm was inspired by grandfather clocks. During the week, this new clock performs. Can you hear the sound? Oh, if we can have sound, please. Performs like a typical clock, displaying the progress of time on its clock face. And like mechanical grandfather clocks, it swings a large brass pendulum to seemingly keep time. This chime marks the start of the weekend, and the pendulum swings upward, hiding the clock face. And at the same moment, and the brass pendulum now hides time rather than keeps time. It stays in place, covering the clock face until the weekend is over. And then another chime sounds to mark the start of the working week. The brass pendulum swings back downward to reveal the clock face again. The pendulum again swings back and forth, and the clock face displays the time. Spa's design aims through material presence and actions to disrupt and make visible the morality of a typical clock, which enforces punctuality and productivity. Her design embodies a different morality that reveals a new experience while still limited by the standards of the artifact, that is a clock. So this discussion of bowls, chairs, and clocks concludes the first part of my talk. My aim at this point is to have expressed how design is a way of knowing the world and shaping it through the relations that emerge between people, things, and world. To design and make a new thing is to ask, if this particular thing existed, how would we know and shape our world differently? I aim to stress that design is a material language and that design is inescapably generative, meaning that reflections on design and its actions are performed by making and bringing forward new things. I continue the theme of designing to know in the next part of my talk. I aim to apply this theme more broadly to understand how designing to know applies to more than trained designers. I hope to show how design, as a basic human thought and actions, apply to us all as everyday designers. Now, this photo was sent to me by one of my graduate students. It shows a skateboarder stopping in a subway station in Vancouver. In this photo, the skateboarder is searching for something in his backpack. To help with this, he has taken his skateboard and jammed it in between the wall and the handrail to hold the skateboard in position. He is then able to hang his backpack by looping the top handle over the rounded nose of the skateboard. The backpack hangs at nearly perfect height and distance from the wall. This is an elegant backpack hanger where none existed before. We can well imagine that the architect did not measure the distance between the wall and the handrail so it would fit a skateboard. Nor did the skateboard designer specify the radius of the curved end of the skateboard so that once jammed between the station wall and the handrail, it would be at an appropriate angle to hold a backpack. And sure enough, the backpack designer made sure that you could hang the backpack, but great luck that it fit over the tip of a skateboard. This ad hoc, resourceful, creative design and use of existing design artifacts is what I refer to as everyday design. So now the concept of everyday design emerged from design ethnography studies our group had conducted over years. We've studied everyday practices such as family life, repair, green DIY, and hobbyist. Everyday design offers a descriptive lens through which to reconsider interactions with and the use of designed artifacts. In this context, the everyday designer, and by this I mean all of us, is a creative agent who renews and redesigns products long after they've left the hands of professional designers. In the context of a post-phenomenological understanding of design, we can see in everyday design the material and concrete mutual shaping of the relations that emerge between people and things. Now, some of you may have seen this earlier today. The idea of everyday design was extended in the work of Audrey Desjardins, in which she argues for a concept of design and living. And Audrey, I'll try to do my best here. And I don't know if I'll do as well as you did earlier today. But in design and living, there is a focus on the temporally long-term and ongoing mutual shaping of people and environments. So this concept emerged from an autobiographical study in which over the course of 2 years, Audrey and her partner Leon Berube converted a cargo van into a camper van that they lived in during extended travel. This intimate analysis of the role of non-digital things in everyday design highlights many lessons and implications for the design of digital artifacts. In many respects, everyday design turns on its head assumptions of traditional interaction design thinking. This is evident in two qualities that are brought to the fore in Desjardins' research on design and living: longevity and unfinishedness. I'm going to struggle with that word, unfinishedness, by the way. Longevity and unfinishedness reveal the dynamic inherent in the relation between people and things. Longevity challenges the assumption that interaction designers can determine our future everyday needs. Can we effectively know people's needs over the next 5, 10, 20 years, over a lifetime, over generations? Despite the best intentions of user-centered design, this is simply not possible. The acceptance of the provisional nature of our lives is explicit in Desjardins' autobiographical design experience with the camper van, in which she described living in the van and making the van at the same time as living in a prototype. The constant tinkering, changing, and adding and subtracting of things in the van is what led her to conclude that our homes, and we can extend this to include our everyday lives, are invariably unfinished. It is this ongoing unfinishedness that allows things to be reshaped as relations change. I mentioned Don Ida, another philosopher of technology, and he describes this dynamic nature as the multi-stability of artifacts, in which there is no fixed identity of an artifact. Artifacts are subject to an unpredictable multiplicity of use context that in each instance determines the relations and values of the artifacts at that time. This is illustrated well in the example of the backpack hanger in the SkyTrain station. As I mentioned, none of the professional designers of the things involved ever anticipated this possibility. It's the everyday designer who realized and materialized the potential at the moment of the handrail, skateboard, and backpack, thus adding to the longevity and unfinished design of the SkyTrain station. It's important to say, though, that the state of unfinishedness does not mean that we, designers and everyday designers alike, are trying to move from unfinished to finished. While the skateboard temporarily reconfigures things at the moment of the photograph, the station is all undone again, or returned to another configuration as soon as the skateboarder disassembles the backpack hanger, collects his things, and moves on to catch his train. This runs counter to the general premise that design is about a more ideal, or at least preferred, or satisfying future. In the instance of the skateboarder and everyday design in general, design is about knowing the future encountered in the present. So in this second part of my talk, we've covered a lot of ground. Discussed the ideas of everyday design, longevity, unfinishedness, and multi-stability. My aim at this point is to have extended the argument from earlier in the talk that design is a way of knowing, and it involves a chain of professional designers, things, and everyday designers. This means that the design in use or design in living is to make a new thing and to ask if this particular thing or arrangement existed, how would it reveal and shape our world differently? At this point of the talk, I hope to have convinced you that design is part of human thought and actions, aimed at knowing the world in a material, concrete, and everyday way. In making the case that everyday designers share the stage with professional designers, I need to be clear that the two identities should not be confused. Professional designers are trained in explicit knowledge of the profession of design, while everyday designers practice design in a number of ways that is mostly implicit and interwoven with everyday practices. My claim is that the two approaches to design coexist at opposite ends of the same continuum. As a consequence, this reframes the role of the professional designer and the nature of what is designed by professional designers. I'm most interested in redirecting the way we consider and design digital artifacts, especially for everyday living. And so the question now turns to exploring these implications and how to investigate the challenge to design digital artifacts, systems, and services as resources for everyday designers. So design functions at the level of the ultimate particular. As design theorists Harold Nelson and Eric Stolterman, who also gave a great talk this afternoon, have argued, the ultimate particular is the actual and final manifested form of an intentional design process. So for example, I'm going to turn to my Vasily chair. The Vasily chair, or even each instance of the chair, can be seen as an ultimate particular. This is my chair, my Vasily chair. I would never part with it, but it's never used for sitting. This is clearly different than the facility chair that Kandinsky presumably really enjoyed. But how are we to anticipate the ultimate particular? Design responds to these dynamics and specificity and design responds to these dynamics with specificity and intentionality to what does not exist. To quote Eric Stolterman, the observable world is not necessarily there, it is becoming as a result of design efforts. As a consequence, any understanding of new forms of digital artifacts must address not only what exists, but also what does not yet exist. With these issues in mind, we developed an approach to research and design we call material speculation. In this approach, design researchers design and produce a counterfactual artifact. A counterfactual artifact is fully realized functioning product or system that intentionally contradicts what would normally be considered logical to create, given the norms of design and design products. So I'll return to the weekend alarm. It's a good example of a counterfactual artifact, since it contradicts the logic of a clock by concealing time. The counterfactual artifact also embodies a proposition. The weekend alarm proposes that we should ignore the regulated keeping of time during the weekends. The quality and nature of the encounter is important. In material speculations, a counterfactual artifact needs to exist in everyday settings over time in order to perform the research and inquiry. The hook I showed at the beginning of this talk is one of our first attempts in using material speculation. The hook is made of two integrated parts, as I said, a hook shape sculpted in maple wood and a bulbous bottom formed in porcelain. Our intention with the hook was to draw on the lessons we learned in everyday design, in our everyday design studies, in which artifacts that relied on simple human competences and everyday materials more easily became resources for everyday designers. Can we have sound? No, I think we have.
Too fast. Everyone, we need to pump at a pace of 100 beats per minute. Oh, okay. That's hard to keep track. How many wavelengths do we have now? Alarms are like basically how you exist right now.
So what was evident in living with the hook was a new type of engagement. We describe one as intersections. This means the incidental and even unnoticed encounters with things. Another we called ensembles. There's arrangements where things become part of collections with other things without being the focus. The table non-table is another material speculation that explores further the idea of intersections and ensembles. The table non-table is a stack of paper the size of a small coffee table that on occasion moves for a brief duration. There are close to 1,000 sheets of paper stacked around a square aluminum post in the center of the table non-table. The movement is random and stays within an area of less than a square meter. The more the table non-table seemed to fit within a home, the more it appeared to fade into the background of everyday living by becoming a part of more complex and diffuse ensembles of things. The table non-table fits comfortably in this collection of non-digital things. That includes drying laundry, cast iron teapot, an objet d'art on a windowsill, and a footrest. Interestingly, engagements emerged among our non-human household members as well. So simultaneously, the table non-table became an artifact of curiosity and worthy of exploration. The family members noticed that the cat noticed before us that the table non-table moves. And soon after the cat played with the table non-table, it gave the humans permission to play with the table non-table. Now, it's important to emphasize that the table non-table and hook are not designed as prototypes to later be realized as commercial products. They are intended exclusively for research. They're crafted in a particular way as counterfactual artifacts to ask particular questions about new qualities and new relations. This general approach of designing as research, whether it is material speculation or another method, is perhaps the purest form of designing to know. So what have we learned from material speculations? I want to conclude this lecture with a focus on designerly lessons from the examples I've shown you. Design lessons that can be extended into new ways of designing digital artifacts for the everyday. To discuss these lessons, I want to elaborate on the tilting bowl project I introduced at the very beginning of this talk. By way of reminder, the tilting bowl is a large ceramic bowl that is embedded with digital processing and small motors so that it periodically tilts. Use sound, please.
All right, that's it. He just comes in here, Mr. Johnny New Eggs, with his moving the mail and his see you, pal.
Now, the first lesson is that the tilting bowl is not designed for human interaction. It's not human-centered. Rather, it's designed to fit within the relations between people and things. As a result, its success will be measured by the degree to which it fades into the background of everyday living. It will be successful if it fits and is taken up into practices in ways that are either surprising or even go unnoticed. We can see the progression away from human-centeredness from the hook to the table non-table to the tilting bowl. The hook still responds to a successful interaction by giving feedback in the form of changing light. There's no relation between the interactions and the behavior with the table non-table. The tilting bowl will tilt or not tilt, regardless of what you and I do. This leads to the second lesson, that limitation is a good design strategy for designing to fit and anticipate multi-stability. It's absurd to instruct someone how to interact with a bowl. Not only because it's so simple, but because there's almost no limit to how a bowl can be used within the dictates of its form, size, and material. Its very limitation in form and function is ironically what gives a bowl myriad capacity. The limited nature of the tilting bowl makes it open and less prescriptive, and thus more able to be a resource. In designing digital things, this is a hard lesson, since designers and technologists are compelled to increase functionality in anything we design. Build it so it's more functional, so it's faster, so it's smarter. In the tilting bowl, the table non-table, the functionality is radically limited, things are slow, and it's smart when it wants to be smart. The third and last lesson is the consideration of material aesthetics in the design of digital artifacts. The tilting bowl is formed from ceramics, the table non-table features paper, and the hook is made of maple and porcelain. Again, I'm going to quote you, Peter Paul Verbeek refers to material aesthetics as appealing to the sensory character of things and the world around us. As humans, we know the specifics of the world through sensory perception. Given this, it becomes clearer that material aesthetics extends to the digital as well. The tilting bowl and table non-table, through digitally produced movement, contribute to the sensory understanding of the artifacts. The digital materialization compels encounters and reflection on the nature of the thing and our relation to it. In this sense, we can talk about the actuation or the movement of the table non-table and the tilting bowl in the same vein as a speed bump. It physically compels one to consider the technology and what it is. So in this final part of my talk, I've discussed how the design and deployment of counterfactual artifacts as material speculation is a way to research the designing of digital artifacts as resources for everyday designers to know, experience, and be in the world. As a result of the material speculations, several important design considerations arose, including intersections, ensembles, designing for fit, limitations, and material aesthetics. I've also aimed to demonstrate how design research is a pure form of designing to know, and a central approach to any understanding of the relations between people, things, and the world. I hope to have demonstrated another trajectory or other sets of possibilities for designing digital artifacts for everyday living. So in this talk, I make the case that significantly more research and design innovation is required to better understand the role and subtle power of digital artifacts, particularly in our everyday lives. I discussed and explained my research that aims to both slow down and make more material the understanding of the mediating role of digital artifacts. I hope to have revealed the nuanced, intimate, and even unconscious ways we understand and engage everyday things, and how this can inform interaction design. Now, I understand that to some of you, these things and experiences will seem trivial. However, I hope to have convinced most of you that the very triviality is what makes these relationships so important. On a daily basis, we are immersed in a world of things. As Eric Stolterman pointed out earlier today, that if we were to constantly interact with them, it would be overwhelming, to say the least. In contrast, the ongoing, trivial, unnoticed, and unintended uses and redesign of things that I have articulated binds us to things and things to us over time. As a consequence, en masse, these connections between things and us mediate our relation to the world, forming and shaping our everyday experiences. Now, the main provocation of this talk is the idea of designing to know. I wanted to raise the stakes for design beyond functionality and symbolic meaning to the essential activity of knowing the world. I wanted to implicate us all together as everyday designers, professional designers, design researchers, as all designing to know in one form or another. I see designing as equivalent to philosophical reasoning or mathematical conceptualizations, as a way to reveal and understand the relations within the world and the configurations and reconfigurations of that world. And we as designers do this revealing by considering or bringing forward new things. So let me conclude that by acknowledging that some of you may find my research to be, for lack of a better word, strange. So given this, let me make the case for the strange, especially in design research. So the last image I want to show you is of the table non-table in my home. It's an earlier version of the hook that had been in our house for some time and was put on top of the table non-table. And in this picture, our cat, one of 4 by the way, whose name is Rusty, is investigating the research. Now the image depicts Rusty approaching the ensemble of the hook and table non-table with a mix of curiosity and caution. Even though the hook had been in our house for some time, in this new arrangement with the table non-table, it seems strange to Rusty. Elevating this discussion to the intellect of humans, or at least my intellect, I approached the ensemble of the hook and table non-table in my own home with a degree of surprise. It was one thing to see them in the research studio, and quite another to see them together in my home. It was making the strange familiar to enhance the difference between the known and unknown. Along with the strangeness was a degree of wonderment of what this might be or what could be as a result of this thing that had materialized in my everyday context. The power of design research is to investigate what we do not know. Design has the unique advantage of intervening materially and concretely in everyday contexts to ask what-if questions or why not. The results should be strange, with some degree of wonderment, and depending on what is made, joy or disgust or something in between. The very ethics of design cannot be anticipated without materializing ideas to face the complexities of existence, which is not to say that judgment cannot and should not intercede at times to say when not to design. But the point is that more often than not, design research draws on design's capacity to solve problems. Now this is great, this is fine, this has produced a lot. However, in new investigations of the unknown, how technology mediates our relation to the world, diving into the unknown, creating problems rather than solutions through design may be the stranger but wiser choice. Thank you.